So dear friends, for the last Sunday of Lent, or at least for the last Sunday during Lenten season, our biblical accounts, especially our Sunday Gospels, were taken from the Gospel of Luke. But this Sunday, our Gospel is different because it is not taken from the Gospel of Luke, but rather from the Gospel of John. And I do believe also, but for so many of us who are so faithful following the Gospel every Sunday, probably it seems a little bit confusing because we jump into another Gospel which is totally different content, because in many cases the story probably they are the same, but the Gospel itself they are different. For instance, today you will not find the story a woman who got adultery in another Gospel. So that's why it's taken from the Gospel of John. So the reason is because the church selects specific key passages from the Gospel, from different Gospel, to highlight different themes. That's why if you pay attention during the Lenten season, they are not in chronological order, the Gospel, because each Gospel has a different themes. Like this Sunday, for instance, the 5th Sunday of Lent, the theme of our reflection is about mercy, forgiveness, and also the nature of God's justice. So let us focus our reflection today on the tension between Jesus and the two different religious groups. Those are Pharisees and the scribes. First of all, in order to understand the gospel today, we need to understand also the context of this encounter between Jesus and the scribes and Pharisees. The context of this incident is on the Feast of Tabernacle, or in the Jewish traditions they call it Sukkot, or also we call it also Feast of Booths, because they would establish different booths. So what is the tabernacle or the Feast of Tabernacle? The Feast Tabernacle is it's just like in our country here, in our culture, we say it Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving for the harvest, but also it is intended to commemorate the saving act of God when the Israelites, they were in the desert. They were hungry and God saved them by receiving food. So that's the meaning of the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. And it is very important for the Jews because the feast lasts for 7 days. So it happened when Jesus was teaching people in the temple at this kind of situations, or the Feast of Tabernacle, at least for 7 days. So Jesus was there teaching a people, and suddenly the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and made her stand in the middle. And it is obvious also that they demanded Jesus to determine what should be done with her, whether or not they should stone her in accordance with Mosaic law. Now the question for us, for our reflection this Sunday, which Mosaic law that justified their actions to stone someone who had committed adultery? Maybe we think about it. We think of one of the 10 commandments, number 7, you shall not commit adultery, right? In the 10 commandments, it says like that. But this law doesn't say if someone commit adultery, they or he or she must be stoned to death. It just say, you shall not commit adultery. It doesn't say how or what is the punishment for this. Rather, it just say directly, you shall not commit adultery. So, in order to understand their the law, to justify their actions, in order to stone this woman, we find their ground to justify their accusation in the book of Torah. So we have in the Jewish tradition, especially the scribes and the Pharisees, because they are really good in interpreting Torah and practicing the Torah. So we find this justification law in the book of Deuteronomy instead of in 10 Commandments. So in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 22, it says like this. Chapter 22, verses 23 until 24. If there is a betrothed virgin, and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them out to the gate of the city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. Then we also find in the book of Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 22, verses 10, it says, if a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both that adulterers and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. But it doesn't say to be stoned to death. The only thing is only in the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, once again, I will repeat, if there is a betrothed virgin and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. Well, apparently, and this is the ground for them, the scribes and the Pharisees, to justify their actions, that they want to Jesus to make a decision whether they or not stone him. So the scribes and the Pharisees especially mentioned this woman was caught in the act of adultery, not fornications. They are so specific though. So not in fornications, which means that that woman was betrothed, or at least she got married already. But the problem here is, according to the Mosaic law, both parties who had committed adultery should be stoned to death. That is the book of Deuteronomy. The question for us now is, where is the man? Where is the man who committed adultery with her? Why did these scribes and Pharisees only bring that woman? We do not know the answer here. But maybe we could assume that they did not see him. But that is not really possible, because in Jewish law, to gain conviction against someone required a very specific type of witness. At least two witnesses must agree and see the act of being played out. So in other words, it would not work if they saw her living in a room or in a compromising situations without having someone else. Meaning to say, if they want to stone her to death, they must bring the man also. So these two witnesses had to see in the very act itself. So they just cannot bring her by herself and starting stone her to death. So these religious leaders are saying they saw that woman in the very act of adultery. If this case, again, where is the man? There is a question over there that we need to understand also why. So at this point, we do not have specific answer. Some speculate perhaps that woman was set up, just like what we hear in the gospel today. And the gospel gives us a very clear understanding, but this one, in order to trap Jesus, they caught that woman. So maybe the man was even among them in the accusing party. But unfortunately, the gospel does not give us information about him. So we cannot be sure at this point. But in these scribes and the Pharisees, they were really concerned about upholding the law. They should have brought the man too, since by their own accusations, they surely had seen him. But the woman was enough for their purpose. It is because they were using her to trap Jesus. Now, the question also here for us is, at the time when they brought out that woman, why only one person, only woman? It is because at the time, woman had no place in the society, especially the authority level. They disregarded all women. And that's the reason also why in the scribes and the Pharisees, it's very easy to just accuse a woman without any ground. So, dear friends, there was only accusation, and then now the question for us is, what does Jesus say about this? In this kind of situation, we need to consider that if Jesus didn't uphold the law, then all he said about the fulfilling the law was a lie. But if he did uphold the law and commanded them to stone her to death, that would be inconsistency with his insistence on grace, mercy, and compassion, which he showed into sinners throughout his ministry. So therefore, in order to understand and also to respond what their accusation is, Jesus bent down and began to write on the ground with his own finger. Again, unfortunately, we do not have any information about what he wrote. Even the author of the gospel did not know about it. But the interesting part in this setting is that Jesus didn't say, "Don't throw the stones," but rather he said, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." What it means is that instead of being trapped by the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus trapped them back. He confronted them by applying the law in this matter. And why? It is because no one among them was qualified to throw the first stone unless Jesus himself. And we can see in the gospel today that Jesus did not throw the stone at her. So it is very brilliant response to the scribes and the Pharisees that Jesus didn't deny the law. He applied the law, yet no one could stand before it. And in response, they went away one by one, the beginning with the elders. So in other words, what we can say and the situation is, those who had come to shame Jesus now live in shame. So after the scribes and the Pharisees left, now the focus turns from the accusers to the accused. And now not one single one was left to condemn her. It was her and Jesus only. When she answered Jesus that none of them condemned her, Jesus said something amazing in response. "Neither do I condemn you. Go and from now on sin no more." Again, at this point, Jesus did not only say, "Neither do I condemn you," but he also said, "From now on sin no more." What it means is that Jesus restored her dignity, treated her with compassion, mercy, and love, instead of give her a verdict for what she had done, even if was true. So what we can learn from the gospel today is that the true Christian is full of grace and forgiveness, which can be found in him. As Christians, we are called to deny ourselves. We are challenged to take up our cross and follow him. It includes about melting before his grace and stepping into the obedience he calls us to. So Christ the Lord forgives, and he also challenges us. We can see it how Jesus addresses the woman into this gospel. He could have said, "I won't condemn you if you don't sin no more." But he didn't say that, because his grace comes first, and that grace empowers us to obey what God wants us to do to others. And this is precisely what we learn when Jesus encounters that woman. He did restore the dignity of woman, but also encourage her to do the better. So let us take a moment of silence that this 5th Sunday of Lent, as we approach the celebration of Palm Sunday and also Holy Week, let us prepare ourselves to be merciful as God himself is merciful.